feeling clear about what is envisaged with the agenda item on effectiveness evaluation at the upcoming COP meeting, and also in terms of the ongoing consultations that had been ongoing between COP 4.1 and 4.2. And if any party might not have had all the opportunity yet to express themselves in this regard in the consultations, you are very welcome to do so today. Or if any parties would like to ask some clarifying questions based on the rich materials that have come forward from parties, as we have it in the online space, this is indeed a very good opportunity today to do so. So please feel free to think about today in that regard as well. And then lastly, as we've also had some questions from some that are a bit newer to the item of effectiveness evaluation and how it fits within the greater work and journey of this convention, I have prepared for the beginning of today just a few slides to answer some basic questions that have at times come to us directly to the Secretariat, and also just to give the frame in terms of everything that has been done so far and where we are going to be heading or hope to head to support you as parties in your deliberations very soon. With that, let me take us to the next slide to give you an overview of what I intend to cover in this check-in session today. As mentioned, the purpose is because we are 10 days away from Bali, and we would like to have this as a last opportunity or an opportunity. There's always chance for more, but an opportunity to check in on the agenda item 4E, and in specifically any tie-ups or any other information that might be helpful to come forward, or that you'd like to be updated on, or that we can update you on in relation to the intersessional consultation. It's structured just in terms of some basic orientation on some basic questions which we sometimes receive on effectiveness evaluation, and then to give you a very short overview of the preparations for COP 4.2. Many of you have been at our document briefings, so this is just to give you the overview of that. I wish to share with you just a few notes on the intersessional consultations and some auxiliary information that may be useful for your further deliberation, and then to summarize the materials available to parties and stakeholders, of course, in the run-up to the conference meeting very soon. And lastly, just that the aim, of course, is the hope is that this meeting will be able to pass a decision to give effect to Article 22 in terms of its deadline to begin the first effectiveness evaluation. But the most important thing is to give space to you today in case there are any other clarifications or any other information that could be useful to support your ability to prepare. With that, if I may take us to the next slide. And just to say that at times we receive questions such as, but what is the purpose of the effectiveness evaluation? Or we receive worries saying, are we taking on new and additional obligations through the effectiveness evaluation? We have also heard that some may be worried that they are individually going to be evaluated. In other words, are individual parties being evaluated? And with regard to monitoring, we have been asked at times if there are additional monitoring obligations coming to parties through the decisions or through the decision on effectiveness evaluation. There may be others, and you may have some, and if there are any other questions that you may have, either now or after the session, please feel free to reach out, and where possible, we would like to try to clarify. At times, though, I hope you understand, we cannot clarify everything because some parts of these questions are also for interpretation by parties as how they see fit, or for guidance by parties how they see fit, including at this upcoming COP. However, on these 4 questions, taking us to the next slide, I would like to offer the following. Firstly, in terms of the purpose of the effectiveness evaluation, overall the purpose is to allow the COP a periodic moment of reflection to consider the extent to which the measures that are existing in the convention and are then, of course, translated into your national contexts, to the extent to which they are achieving the convention's objectives. With regard to, is there a new obligation or are there additional obligations coming to parties with regard to effectiveness evaluation? Our reply would be that no, there's nothing additional coming or new coming. The periodic evaluation of the effectiveness of the convention is clearly laid out in Article 22 and is part of every consideration of a country joining the Minamata Convention. Furthermore, it is not an individual task, it is the task of the COP. So it is in fact core business of the COP to conduct this task at the times it sees relevant and fit and as it decides to do so. With regard to the third question, will individual parties be evaluated? The answer is no, this is not an evaluation of a party or some parties. It is not an evaluation of implementation status or compliance status. It is a periodic evaluation to reflect on the overall progress of the objective of overall progress of change towards the objective of the convention. And here I wish to just refer to you to the objective, of course, of the convention, which is captured in the first article of the convention text, and that is to protect human health and environment from the harmful anthropogenic effects of mercury and mercury compounds, whether that's through releases or emissions. And may I also just here, in a way, just hold that much like in project evaluations, there is a time when a project is evaluated. This is the same approach that effectiveness evaluation of the entire Minamata Convention would be framed in. And lastly, I just want to answer a long question and maybe a complicated question with a simple no, which is, are there additional monitoring obligations coming to parties through the effectiveness evaluation? That is not the intention. That is not how it is being intended. So this is a no. But with that, I would like to move forward and just, of course, say that what I have just explained is an orientation to some of the basic questions. These questions sometimes come to us with more nuances and more detail or more requests. And again, it's not always possible for us to answer it all, but we hope that there's a basic orientation, and this basic orientation may also be helpful to you. With that, the next slide really puts the difference, because there's one other question that at times pops up, and that is the implementation, the review of implementation versus the review of change over time, or tracking implementation versus tracking change over time. Thank you, Lynn, for managing that. Here, in terms of the difference between tracking implementation and tracking change, on the other hand, tracking implementation is also a task of the COP, of course, and that comes through Article 21, through the national reports, where all parties report on a regular basis. But tracking change is a periodic exercise of the COP that it chooses to do at a particular time. And it does entail, according to the article, particular elements of work that you can see displayed here. It is meant to be taken on the basis of available information and also comparable monitoring data. It is meant to be taken on the basis of reports submitted, including the national reports and other relevant information. The full text of that article, of course, many of you are very, very aware of and familiar with. But now to the next slide. In terms of preparations for COP 4.2, and perhaps you've seen this schedule many times, and in many ways we hope you are beginning to internalize this as a type of roadmap, how the days would unfold for COP 4.2 according to the tentative schedule of work, if indeed accepted as such by the COP on its first day. But according to this, and given the importance of this particular agenda item to this timing of the COP, effectiveness evaluation is set for the afternoon of Monday, so that early time of the COP can be placed on this agenda item, and also so that the presumed contact group which would be established can begin work on Monday as soon as plenary closes on this matter. And so you will see the other agenda items, of course, that are also important to the COP and will also have their time in plenary and other time as necessary, but effectiveness evaluation is being prioritized on the Monday. Going to the next slide. In terms of the preparations for how we got here, and you will have heard me speak about the mandates that come both from or through the convention text, but also through deliberations at COP 1, 2, and 3. And of course, the deadline that parties are trying to work towards is the 2023 deadline that is set out as the deadline for beginning the first effectiveness evaluation. The text reads 6 years after the entry into force of the convention. And so at COP 4.1, and given the urgency of this, effectiveness evaluation was one of the topics that was given time at our online COP in November last year. The deliberations on that topic are, of course, held in our report that is displayed here, that I'm sure you've had a look at already. But just to recall, the agenda item was opened and an overview was given of the documents that were prepared for COP4, as well as which specifically deal also with the requests made by the COP for work in the intersessional process according to decision 310. The COP also was introduced, to the COP also was introduced a conference room paper 1, and subsequent to that introduction and comments and discussion by the COP agreed to an intersessional consultation on the framework for the effectiveness of the evaluation. This consultation time occurred, in other words, after COP 4.1 and now between and coming to COP 4.2. The focus was on the framework. It was open and is open to all parties, and stakeholders are invited to. It is participatory in approach. It is based mostly on written comments, written submissions that have been received from a range of parties. It is supported also by full transparency through the online workspace, so that all parties have access to the comments that have been submitted, as well as the deliberations of the consultation so far. And just to recall that there was a dialogue, a presentation and a dialogue and a conversation in many ways on the 25th and 27th of January based on the written submissions. To alert, and I hope it is later today, that the framework document, it's a very short document outlining the process of the intersessional consultations, will be up today. But all of the comments that have been put forward by parties are, of course, available in the online workspace. And moving forward, in the next 10 days, when we meet in Bali, the COP is set to resume this agenda item. The introduction of the documents will be done that have been prepared for all of COP4, including this additional one on the framework. And then it is for COP to deliberate and decide upon the first effectiveness evaluation. And as mentioned, it is proposed, or it is very likely to be proposed, that a contact group is established to be able to focus on this work. Moving to the next slide. I'd just like to recall with thanks the many written comments received. Some of them were general comments, and would like to express our appreciation to those that sent those: Kuwait, Mauritius, Oman. Thank you very much for that. We also had specific written comments, questions, and additional clarifications that were received from China, from the EU, from Iran, from Japan, from the UK, and from the United States. And just to note that the participation in the online sessions on the 25th and 27th, you see displayed here all the countries all the parties that were represented, but also we had representation by some non-parties, and stakeholder organizations have also joined us. So it was it has really brought together, it has really enabled many, we hope, to either participate, to listen to, and to contribute to these consultations. As mentioned, all of the materials are available on the online workspace. And the next slide, just shortly to recall that the comments that were prepared and presented, and also the comments made and added, or questions, in large part related to comments with regard to the table put forward in document 418 that speaks to the overall areas of work that have been done so far in light of the COP's need to put in place the arrangements for an effectiveness evaluation, but also with regard to the CRP that was put forward by the government of Norway and Canada. And here, just to highlight, in that CRP, besides an explanatory note at the beginning, there is a draft decision put forward. There is also a terms of reference for an effectiveness evaluation committee, and a terms of reference for a science advisory body as well. But also during the consultations, we had received some comments on some of the other documents that are also part of effectiveness evaluation agenda item and the overall work on this agenda item, namely some comments on the work on indicators. You will recall that indicators was one of the areas of work between COP3 and COP4, and many parties participated in those consultations and have put forward proposals for refinement, for last refinements of the indicators that could be used by the evaluation. Also, there were comments on the draft monitoring guidance. You will recall that the decision requested the Secretariat with others' expertise to advance the work on drafting guidance that on how to monitor mercury in support of the work of the effectiveness evaluation. And so some parties also referred to that in their comments. And lastly, beg your pardon, reference was also made to some parts or some elements of the report put forward in advance of COP3, which was the report put forward at the time of that work towards the framework. And let me just highlight, without being able to do justice to the rich comments that have come forward, that some of the items raised in the online session, either in comments or in written comments or in questions or deliberations then, was that parties expressed themselves on the effectiveness evaluation committee. There were also parties that recalled the policy questions that had been put forward in advance of COP4 in terms of framing the effectiveness evaluation. There was also a number of comments on the expert group, on the science advisory group, to support the effectiveness evaluation and or other forms of labeling exactly that group. And there was also some comments made and items raised about the role of the COP review, the role of party review of the report that will become the effectiveness evaluation report of the COP through the journey of the first evaluation. So as next slide, just 2 slides of extra information, if I may. And partly this is because at times we are asked about how the national reports will feed into the evaluation and how it will support the evaluation. So laid out here, and if you've joined us for the national report session, you will have seen the slide or a portion of the slide before. Namely, here you see the overall timeline on national reports. National reports are, of course, due by all parties according to the provisions of Article 21. We have had the first short reports come in at the end of 2020, and also now we have a tremendous amount of the full reports that have come in for the end of last year, 2021. These are sent to the Secretariat and will be presented to the respective COPs in view of the COP's review of implementation. But they also serve a double function, namely they provide an immense amount of information to the COP and to the community of parties. And so it is envisaged that the effectiveness evaluation will also be able to draw as secondary on this information. In other words, the one process will be able to be helpful to the other process, but it is two distinct processes. So at the bottom of the slide here, you will simply see that the effectiveness evaluation, reading the full text, of course, that I did earlier, is supposed to be conducted based on available information, but it also is to use performance indicators once it draws out from the available information. And may I just say here that Article 21 reports are, of course, a major source of information for this evaluation. And as reported in document 418, the Secretariat is currently busy to prepare the Article 21 synthesis report, which will also be in aid of and support the effectiveness evaluation. And the work for that report comes from data that we can gain from the first short reports and the first full reports. And this report would be coming forward to COP5. Moving to the next slide. Just to show here, because it was recalled by some parties, that there were policy questions put forward to shape the frame of the effectiveness evaluation, or the overall framework of effectiveness evaluation. This was set out in paragraph 3 and is used in the document that was prepared for COP3. And so here just displayed the 4 policy questions that had been put forward. Firstly, have parties taken action to implement the Minamata Convention? Have the actions taken resulted in changes in mercury supply, use, emissions, and releases into the environment? Thirdly, have those changes resulted in changes in levels of mercury in different media? And can that be attributed to the Minamata Convention? And last, to what extent are existing measures under the Minamata Convention meeting the objective of protecting human health and the environment from mercury? In other words, the Article 1 objective of the convention. And just to put underneath, as you can see here, that additionally, there is the report on trade, supply, and demand that has been requested by COP3, and that is under development and will also draw from information, including from national report information that is coming forward. And also, as you know, there has been mandated by COP3 work on advancing drafting guidance on monitoring mercury and in a way on monitoring mercury to maintain harmonized and comparable information. And this work has also advanced, as you will have seen in Addenda 2 to the document 18, as well as INF 12 and INF 25. Let me take us to the next slide. Just to summarize that there are a number of materials in front of the COP now as it begins the last sprint to meeting in Bali. There is the document prepared, almost all except one of the documents is prepared by the Secretariat. The first one giving the overall frame of preparations for and now what would have to happen next at COP 4.2, that is in document 18. The work on indicators that was requested, you can find the work in Addenda 1 supported by INF 11, the work requested on advancing monitoring, draft monitoring guidance that you will find in Addenda 2 supported by INF 12, and there's also supplementary information and materials in INF 25. And then, and as mentioned, we hope to have it up today, which is Addenda 3, which gives you a very slim process outline of of the framework consultations between the two segments of our COP. But also to say there is, of course, the CRP that is available as put forward by Norway and Canada, and the link to the online workspace of all the submissions and other materials that have been put together to support the framework consultations. And lastly, just in case you wish to refer back to it, there is the report, the details of the report before COP3. With that, let me go to the next slide, just to highlight, in case you have not been in the online workspace, here you can see how it's laid out. It gives you background, it gives you the information per consultation session, and then it lays out all the comments received in the way they were received, which you can access as needed. And therefore, to the next slide, it is indeed that August 2023, 15th of August 2023 to be precise, that would be the last calendar date by which to start the effectiveness evaluation if the COP were to take were to be able to keep the deadline. And so it is really for COP 4.2 meeting now to hope to come to an agreement to give effect to that part of Article 22, namely to begin the process based on all the preparations that the COP has already done over the last couple of years. Just to highlight, and you will have seen a version of the slide in the document briefing, that one of the items that is foreseen or had been foreseen by parties is an establishment of the Effectiveness Evaluation Committee. And then, as also has been coming through different documents, either for COP4 or including in the comments and deliberations of the intersessional consultation, much work has been done on indicators, and now in this time between COP3 and 4, parties have worked very hard at finding the final refinements necessary to indicators, but it is not quite completed, and so the COP would need to have an approach on how to complete its considerations to establish and identify the indicators it wishes to use for the first effectiveness evaluation. Also, while much work has gone into advancing the draft guidance to conduct an effectiveness evaluation on the basis of available information, including comparable monitoring data, of course, this work is also not yet quite concluded, and an approach to that would also need to be found for the COP to move forward on this. With this, the only remaining slide now is to open the floor to you and to see if there are any other clarifications that you maybe would like to have that would be in support of you as parties, and of course others as well, in terms of preparing. And perhaps one item that I would like to perhaps just highlight is that I had shown you the countries that had submitted consultations, so had submitted written contributions, which they all had a chance to present at the meeting either on the 25th or the 27th of January. But just to indicate that on the 27th, there was also an invitation extended to add more questions or comments or clarifications if necessary. And I'm very grateful to both China and the United States to have added a little bit more. China had already added comments, of course, but there were also some questions that were indicated by the colleague, and they are available in written form in the space if anybody would like to go back to that. And I would also like to recognize that the United States had put forward some more clarifications in writing. And so if I may perhaps look into the virtual room, I do see a number of colleagues from the United States. Perhaps if I could call on, I think it would be Mr. Terry Keating, if perhaps just to speak to also the clarifications you have put forward. Terry, the floor is yours, please. I think you simply need to unmute.
Thank you, Claudia. First of all, we really appreciate all the work that's gone into the consultation to prepare us to this point. We submitted a brief clarification about 2 points that came up in the online consultation. One is the concerns about assuring data quality from through the monitoring for the effectiveness evaluation. And we believe very strongly that data quality is a very important consideration in the monitoring guidance and in preparing for the effectiveness evaluation. And the way that we recommend approaching that is laid out in the monitoring guidance, and that is this data flagging approach. And the idea is not to exclude data from gathering and consideration a priori at the beginning of the process, but more to identify data as it's collected and compiled and compare that to various criteria, and then transparently flag data so that it can be appropriately used and it's fit for purpose for each analysis that's gone on. And so we think that this way that more information can be transparently integrated into the analysis, and it will allow more data to be looked at and by the experts as part of the work. China, in their written comments before the online effectiveness evaluation, identified a number of criteria that would be particularly useful as data flags or data descriptors. And our expectation is that this data flagging approach is described in general in the monitoring guidance as it exists now, but we're expecting that the supplemental materials and the further work continuing on the supplemental materials will more fully develop this approach. And so this is work that needs to continue. We also, in our brief clarification, we had discussed the development of emissions and releases information and the summary of that. And it's the United States view that there's a significant amount of work that's going to be needed to pull together a summary of available emissions and releases information. And we think that work needs to start as soon as possible. And in order to allow for that work to be overseen by party experts and engage through party review. And so we're hoping that there is a clear path forward for that work. In CRP1, that the role of overseeing that work is given to the SAGE, the Scientific Advisory Group on Effectiveness Evaluation, and we think that that's an appropriate role and process. As we see the SAGE as it's laid out in CRP1, it allows for both a core group of party experts and to participate, but we have proposed that there's also be a much wider roster of scientific experts and other stakeholders that are nominated by parties who can participate in that process. And we think this is important to create opportunities for wide participation and transparency in the technical aspects of the effectiveness evaluation. So that I'm hoping that my brief clarifications here help to clarify our clarifications as opposed to muddying the waters any further. But those were the items that we discuss in our written comments. So thank you, Claudia, for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Terry. The note is made very well that there is still work that needs to continue, including on the supplemental materials. So that is one of the comments made by Terry, but also and by the United States, but also very practically that the work for emissions and releases is of course very technical work and requires a very specific amount of expertise and time and space to be able to do properly. And so your comment about the ability of the proposed SAGE in this regard, both in terms of its role and also the process, and also your comment, and I feel that responds to some comments heard also earlier about who the experts are that would be engaged in such a process. You have outlined that the United States feels there's a core group of experts, but also to use a roster of ensuring wider participation of experts, probably from different regions, and to balance the expertise that's required to make it encompassing but also transparent. I hope I have summarized that correctly, although of course please do have a look at the very well laid out clarification, of course, that you can see in the online space. It's a one-pager speaking very succinctly to each of the points Terry just outlined. I would like to ask if there are any other parties that would like to either ask any points of clarification, either on anything that was presented before or that has perhaps not even been presented. It could be a basic question, it could be a more complex question or a more detailed question based on a reading of the other presentations and submissions. So if I may look to the room, if there are any hands up of any other items that require some time to unpack a little bit, or if there are any other areas or any particular submission you wanted to have more information on. I don't see a rush for hands right now. You're also welcome, of course, to put the question in the chat if that is easier for you. But to perhaps just give the frame, it is 10 days to go, but there has been a lot of thinking going on within parties. We can see that, but also between parties, to understand each other's perspectives better, to give consideration to perhaps finding some new information that wasn't clear perhaps at COP3, but that is becoming clearer now through the written submission. So we hope that has helped you. I'd like to think that no questions mean that there's nothing more to check in on and you feel ready and informed enough to proceed. If I may just wait for a moment. But just to say that if there is any other matter you would like to bring up or bring forward, either in the next days, you are very welcome to reach out to me or any of us if you needed any other information. In terms of COP4 preparations, you will know that many are arriving either on the Friday before the COP starts or on the Saturday. Two regional groups begin their regional consultations on Saturday the 19th already in the afternoon, while other groups have decided to meet from Sunday onwards. So there will also be time on the weekend before to perhaps link even across regions where that is necessary, to perhaps clarify any other items. We have, before COP4, through the CRP, a draft decision, and the government of Norway and Canada putting it forward. They had offered the CRP as a basis of beginning the discussions at COP 4.2. So that is one of the items US parties will have to deliberate on or consider on, so that these messages will be able to be coming forward when the agenda item opens or resumes, in fact. I do see a comment from Japan. Just a second. Is there a plan to compile the written comments submitted into an INF, or is the file storage the way to access these comments? Thank you very much for this question. Given the shortness of time, we have been asked to do it through the online website, the online workspace. So rather than having it compiled in an INF, these are available by link to the online storage. The Addenda 3 is setting out the process that had been put in place to help parties in the interim, but it is not a distillation of the written comments, and it is not a compilation from a perspective of different annexes to it. These are all in their own form available through the online workspace. I hope I've been able to clarify that. The document does include the links to the online workspace, and should there be any worry of any party that they cannot reach the online workspace, we would be happy to facilitate that in a different way. And if there might be any other questions on documents or proceedings or any other matters, please feel free. Thank you for those that have added comments that everything is clear, which we really hope. And of course, if indeed we have been efficient and effective in our time, and there are no other matters you might want to bring today, then it is no crime to finish a bit earlier and allow ourselves some time. I notice many of you are also joining our many side events that we are holding this week. And it has been very nice to have to see your strong interest in the work of all the different parties and all the different partners to the Minamata Convention. If I may just look one more time that I'm not missing anybody in terms of a question or a comment, then I would like to offer to close this session, but always, of course, to say please reach out if something pops on afterwards, because we would be happy to help or to put you in touch with another delegate if that would be helpful to you. With that, then let me thank you for your time and just express that we sincerely look forward to being together with you, as many of you as possible, in Bali soon, and see you soon there, or we see you online if you are joining us online. And otherwise, if you want to join any of our side events, you can also see those links, of course, on our website. With that, my thanks and the thanks of the Secretariat, and wishing you a good rest of the day. Until soon. Stay well.